I will talk about work. It's kind of overview. I will go back and overview several things. Mostly it's work from my group because it's just easier. So you have slides available, but hopefully it has some general usefulness. So I have to acknowledge, because it's work from my group, I have to acknowledge people. In this case, it's a mix, so I just acknowledge the whole group, and I don't list really names. This is my group. It's a snapshot, maybe half a year ago. In physics departments, I usually say this is like grand canonical ensemble because particles join and some particles leave. So it's not really fixed ensemble. And these are things that we do. This is just an illustration, of course. One big theme of our work is to try to understand from atomic level of interactions between the atoms and chemistry and forces, which we can describe with modern methods, either classical potentials or first principles density functional. And then they assemble somehow according to these forces and basic laws, and then they create, depending on chemistry and conditions, they create variety of materials, variety of nanostructures, and that's the arrows that we try to understand. That's very broadly, I'm saying. And these are examples from our work over a few years of the different papers. We work on things here. Nanotubes is still active theme in my group. We work on graphene. This is collaborative work with Rod Ruoff. This is graphene helicoids. We work on beyond graphene, boron, nitrogen, TMD's theory, of course, simulations. And recently a lot of work on boron, which I do not discuss today, phosphorine, grain boundaries, and so on. So this is pretty broad. I will talk about defects. I have to acknowledge also our agencies which fund this work and all those people over years. Of course, we enjoy the support this year. Everything is kind of, as you know, is a bit uncertain. And I was recently in China. I was just a few weeks ago in the Shaanxi University. And that's what they have. This is our new government kind of in Chinese shopping mall. You see, it's a huge statue. They sell toys about this size. It was kind of fun to bump into this when I was in Taiwan. Anyway, so we hope it will be okay. In terms of support for research, that's our topic here, and everything else as well. Now, it may be good. I will give examples from different areas, focusing on defects. So in perspective, I often use this slide, which came from discussion with a reporter from Chemical Engineering News who asked me, we talked about nanotubes. He was writing a perspective for 25 years of research on nanotubes. And he asked me to put nanotubes research in this Gartner hype cycle curve, which most of you know. Of course, it's just a plot representing evolution of ideas in science and technology from a beginning to a lot of expectations and publicity and the hype peak, and then there is always, because too much of promise, and then there is a disappointment, and then valley of death, and so on and so on. And then there is a slope of enlightenment, and the nanotubes are here, but graphene probably is here. Sometimes you can say, yes, it's kind of rapidly going down overall. Although China has now huge investment in graphene and carbon. And this is beyond graphene, and this is work which, for me, it would be maybe boron two-dimensional, but for you individually, you can put your research maybe here, I mean, students, and say, well, good, it's coming, okay? But no guarantees, it may go this way, so you have to be careful. It's a very popular picture. It's not China, but in China you show this. It exists in all languages. I have a collection of them, so you can pick one. So I will go back very long time back. I will start from nanotubes, when many years ago we tried to understand strength of nanotubes, because it was also, of course, promised that they are very strong, and they are very strong. And at that time, with what you do in theory, you try to just simulate it maybe, and that you simulate it, you get this kind of at that time state of the art. It's molecular dynamics simulation. It still looks very good even now, 20 years later. It shows what? It shows breaking tube, changing color, and even I will show you snapshots to go through this. So color in this video represented level of strain. Basically, color map is energy per atom. So when it's red, it means that it's already highly strained, but the lattice is still perfect. And then something happens, and then it starts failing, and you see here, 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 and then you see a lot of interesting physics here, actually, like change of hybridization. You see from sp2 in graphene type of lattice, it changes into sp monoatomic chains, which now we call carbine, and then they keep stretching. And you can also see acoustic waves. If you look in video carefully, you see this rainbow color propagating, so you almost can hear the noise when you break the structure. It's cracking, and that's acoustic waves, and there is a lot of interesting stuff. But problem was that as fascinating as it is, this video of simulation, it fails answering key question. And key question is, so how strong this structure is. In other words, what is the very, very first step, transition from perfect lattice to not perfect lattice? What is very first step? You don't see first step. What you see here, you see that it's perfect lattice, highly strained, and then suddenly it's just amorphous mass. And mass is here. And mass is not a good scientific message, right? It's just something happens, but you cannot really say what. So the real challenge was to understand what is the very first defect. And molecular dynamics just fails in answering this, at least the way we usually run it. And then we try to do it a different way, just by kind of thinking and going back to old-fashioned, yes? You can, but it will take you about 1 million years. Yes, you can. I cannot. I cannot afford it, but you can. How long is your Muri? So you can start today. Okay. Anyway, then you think, nanotube is just a crystal. Now it's actually much easier because we know that graphene is a crystal, so on. At that time it was almost kind of revolutionary idea because nanotube were coming more from chemistry world. And then to say that it's a crystal was, okay, interesting, it is a crystal. And if nanotube is a crystal, then we know how crystals and metals and other crystals yield to very high tension. They yield to very high force by dislocation glides, by glide of formation of dislocation loops and propagation through the lattice. And then you think something like this should maybe happening in the nanotube under very high strain and some temperature. And then you think, okay, so I should look at the graphene, graphite, and you look at this paper. It's not even cited here. It's like 1956 or something, Thomas and Roscoe paper, which shows hand-drawn, of course, they didn't have computers, hand-drawn low-angle grain boundary in graphite, graphene. For us, it's graphene. For them, it was graphite. And you see, oh, very nice. This is low-angle grain boundary, which means that these pear-shaped yellow objects must be dislocation cores. They are dislocation cores. These are symbols. Okay, this is low-angle grain boundary. Then it means that under very high tension, the yield of material should be motion of these objects, glide of dislocations, okay? And if you have perfect lattice, like nanotube, we think it's perfect, or at least we want it to be perfect, then first you have to create dislocation dipole. And then you just figure out, so how dislocation dipole should look like. Dislocation dipole, if this is one dislocation, then dislocation dipole should look like one of them and then inverted twin, right? You just invert it and then together this is dislocation dipole. So it should be structured like this, and if they form somehow under tension and high temperature, then they can start moving, and that would be your mechanism of yield. And this would be this should be a first defect which is topic of today's lecture. First defect responsible for the yield in carbon lattice, in this two-dimensional carbon lattice. So how could it happen? And this is interesting because at that point you see a bridge here with Fullerian chemistry. You can create this type of defect very easily, I mean, conceptually. You have a lot of hexagons. This is your wall of nanotube or graphene, many hexagons. All you need to do, you need to take one bond here and rotate it 90 degrees. After that, atoms reconnect, and that's you have it, 5, 7, 5, 7, right? Interestingly, this transformation was well known in chemistry of fullerenes as a Stone-Wells transformation. It's called Stone-Wells transformation. You just flip bond 90 degrees, and you can do, for chemists, it was isomerization of fullerenes. It's isomer. This is isomer. If you have a cage, you just create many isomers by flipping these bonds one after another. And for C60, I believe it's almost 2,000 isomers you can create. So this slide is as simple as it is. It's in a sense very important because it kind of bridges world of chemistry, isomerization process, with the world of mechanics of materials, or physics of crystals, because at the same time it's a dislocation dipole which can be created in the lattice. So this is very nice because you connect to two communities. Chemists have no idea what dislocations are, and I would say physicists, most and material scientists, had no idea what Stone-Wells transformation is because it's isomerization of some exotic Fullerene cages, right? Who knows? So this is the same thing. So after you realize it, you can develop this idea into something, and that's what I'm telling you. After you realize that first step must be like this, rotation of this bond, now you keep in mind that you keep pulling it, right? This is under load. So then, good chance, so almost definitely, next this bond should rotate, right? This green one, because it's under same conditions. One of these four, they're symmetric, one of these four should rotate. Then what happens? You can figure out this story by using just pencil and paper. If you rotate this bond, you see what will happen? Put it perpendicular, it recovers hexagon here, and instead creates pentagon and heptagon here. So you transition, so this is again isomerization process, right? You just have another isomer. But at the same time, what happens is quite remarkable because here you recover perfect lattice, you have hexagons. And now you split your two objects, which are dislocation cores, which of course you can repeat, and what you see is, not surprisingly, is dislocation glide. So now these 5 sevens, by just repetition of Stone-Wells transformations, they can go further away from each other, and this is your dipole nucleated by first rotation. Now it splits and can propagate. Now if you fantasize more, at that time it was just a fantasy. You can think that in crystal, what would happen? We know in crystal, dislocations propagate in well-defined crystallographic direction. They can only glide this way, and this is called glide plane, right? Nanotube is a very funny crystal because it's kind of a cylindrical crystal. So glide plane in cylindrical geometry will not be really a plane, it will be a spiral, right? It will be a spiral. So you can say, oh, I expect that this thing should glide like this. And then, of course, we know from materials, from crystal physics, we know that this is topological defect. Topological defect in the sense that if you have a contour in your lattice, you go around it, you get a misfit after you completed your contour, you get a Burger's vector. So this thing characterized by well-defined topological invariant caused Burger's vector. That's important because then you look back at nanotube, and although I don't talk about nanotubes, I kind of rely that all of you know that they have chiral symmetry and they're characterized by chiral indexes, and there are these two numbers, they're like social security number for nanotubes, N, M. 1010 would be metallic, 109 would be semiconductor and whatnot. And 15.0 is a semiconductor with different band gap, and there are different rules. What happened here? bad nanotube in the circuit. I didn't do anything wrong.
Just wanted to sleep on it.
Okay, so it just makes this conclusion more exciting, because if there is Burger's vector here, then you can immediately, again, without any simulations, you just see that this index, chirality index of this original tube must change by 1, because Burger's vector of this 5, 7 is 1. It can be 0, 1, 1, 0, or 1 minus 1. There are 6 identical kind of, depending on orientation. You change index by 1, so you can say, oh, this tube must become 10, 9. This tube must become 10, 9. It means that this has a metal, no gap, and this one becomes semiconductor, there is a gap. So you just by doing plastic transformation and nothing else, you created heterojunction, right? Now you have metal, semiconductor, metal, no other elements, all carbon, just by tweaking symmetry, and all happens in this process. You have to just stretch it, at least by topology rules, that's what you get. So this was quite interesting, and this kind of was a story of relaxation without any calculations. And when we did it, it was I had this idea, and I didn't describe it yet. And we worked with Rick Smalley at that time on this review article. This is a little bit crazy to my point, but he wanted it on the cover. This was a picture done by the artist. He was hired by the magazine to do this picture of space elevator. I don't need to go into space elevator, but the point was, I'm going to tell you about my perspective. This was already finished. And the guy who was doing it, I never met him. It was artist in Seattle, David Miller. My role was to control that he does things right, and he was doing everything wrong. Because he had no clue about engineering. He was just artist, mostly drawing animals. He knew fish, but he didn't know what space elevator is. So when they told him to do space elevator, he was doing like a tangential, and they tell him, no, it should be radial, right direction. It should be radial direction. So he said, okay, I will redo it. Then put it in the wrong place. Then he says, okay, where do you want me to land it? It should be Texas, because one author is in Texas. Should it be in North Carolina? I'm in North Carolina, and I say, no, David, this is wrong. You don't understand. Space elevator should be above the equator, right? Any engineering students understand it. Space elevator should be above the equator, okay? Above the equator. So he redid it again, and he was very patient with me, and then he calls me and says, look, I'm tired of you, really. I looked around the globe, and there are no politically stable countries, so I cannot choose. You tell me exactly where you want me to land it. So finally he landed it somewhere, I don't know, Colombia, or what is it, Peru. Also not, maybe drug trafficking area, I don't know. But he did it. But my point is that at that time he was already very upset with me, because he was redoing the sketches. And then I say, David, can you do me last favor? I promise this is the last time I ask you. Can you just, in the lattice, can you draw instead of, and I sent him pencil, fax. At that time it was through fax mostly. I say, can you put a few defects here? So this way, the readers will see how really this cable would fail. And I would have my science published without referring process, and not just published, but right on the cover. So he did it for me. He did this for me, and I made this nice copy. And then I showed it to Rick Smalley, my co-author. And Rick was, of course, a great scientist, but he was also a very politically kind of astute person. And he said, Boris, as much as I don't know what's going on, as much as I love your theory, we don't want to see this cable failing. We want to show that it's unbreakable. So let's remove these defects. so then I called David and says, I'm very sorry, Dave, you have to remove them again. This is oil painting. So she just he could do it. I have original, so it's already a pretty thick layer of. Okay, so this is. But point is that we really figured out at that time, and then if you know what to do, this is back to Mitch's question. Yes, if you know what to expect. Problem with molecular dynamic simulation that it's extremely chaotic. It's very hard to catch something what kind of makes sense. But if you know what you look for, then yes, you can do it. So this is in molecular dynamics, high temperature. You can see these defects really emerging. You cannot actually see them emerging, remember. You can put them aside and you can see them gliding because this is lower barrier, you can see. So this is really MD simulation, and you see really they follow in MD, they follow this specific line, and you change diameter a little bit according to the rules, and you change chirality a little bit. So this was all very nice, and in theory it was kind of like correct. And I can show you this MD which we did later, just for one step. This is boron nitrogen. Boron nitrogen, the same story. BN nanotube or BN sheet. You see this bond rotating. This is at high temperature and under high tension, which is not easy to see, but I'm telling you, it's about 10%, 10% strain, and then it motivates this rotation because this defect elongates. So that's the mechanism of first yield, and this is defect responsible for initiation of yield, and that's of course also at the same time it's a dislocation dipole, and dislocations are important. Now, to my own shocking surprise, actually, although we had this theoretical stuff, it's like 9 years later. 9 years later, there is this paper with experimental demonstration that yes, it really happens. It really happens. This was done by Jenny Huang, also Millie Dresselhaus, who passed away recently. She was co-author on this work. This was MIT and Boston College. They did this beautiful experiments, beautiful in the sense it was hard, I guess. What they do, they take a pretty fat nanotube, it's just a graphene sheet wrapped into a cylinder. They heat it up using Joule heating. They just drive current, like the lamp bulb. You don't have incandescent lamps here. But you heat it up to 2000, above 2000, very high temperature, and apply tension. And apply tension. And that's what they see. They see what they call superplasticity. They see that this structure elongates, it doesn't break. It elongates like 3 times. It becomes thinner, thinner, thinner. It elongates 3 times. And if you look carefully, they also see little kinks. They actually do see these dislocation signatures because they look like this. This is dislocation, 5-7. And they see them moving. So if they see that they move around, you don't see around, you just see that one thing disappears and then appears on the other side. So you basically can be sure that they go around this spiral. They just glide spirally. And this was experimental evidence of this superplastic behavior through this mechanism that I just described to you. I will show you this video. This is very old, and it's probably, hopefully, works. If you look carefully, you see this kink here. You see this kink here. It's moving, 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 moving forward, and this thing becomes a bit thinner, and then step by step it just thins, and a lot of carbon goes away. Of course, there was a little challenge there because there was a difference. If you look carefully and you just evaluate the amount of carbon, you can see from numbers, simple numbers, that not only they stretch it, they also lose a large number of carbon because there is sublimation going on. It is high temperature plus electron beam. So there is something more, of course, than just plastic glide of dislocations. That's what we explored a little bit because it was very non-obvious. If you think about just using common sense, what should happen? If you have high energy radiation beam, of course you can knock out atoms and you create defects, probably vacancies or something like this. This is straightforward, and what would you expect? If you do it, you think that big structure should become kind of like a lot of holes, like a cheese kind of structure, and then fall apart. Why it doesn't do it? Because you show in the experiment that it remains pretty much intact cylinder. It just stretches. You don't see it decomposing into amorphous, full of hole structure. If you do simple simulation, you also see this kind of same thing, which is not what is an experiment. So what do? We wanted to understand it and look more carefully into the energy of removing one atom, or two atoms to that matter, from different locations. If you do careful calculation of energy cost of removing carbon, imagine it's exposed to the beam. We didn't do analysis of real scattering. We just know that beam knocks them out. That's enough. But if you evaluate energy cost, this is the map that you get. And you find this is a colored map. You find that some places are much harder to remove, like from here. And you could create vacancy, but it costs high energy. Some places, like on the edge, is easier to remove, and so on. So you can rank them. And a little bit surprisingly, you find that the easiest place to remove carbon is actually from this 5,7. It's even easier than removing it from the edge. You can remove it from this 5,7, and why? Why is it so energy cheap, energetically cheap from this particular location? That's also easy to understand if you think about what's going on. This is MD simulation, but I will not focus on it because it doesn't give you much of an insight. This is just what's happening. You kind of what I think helps to understand. If you look at this structure, this is dislocation essentially, or 5,7 defect in graphene, or whatever you want to call it. And now you remove from this structure these two atoms. Something very clever happens. It self-heals, right? What it does, it self-heals. If I remove these two atoms, so now they go into gas phase, being knocked away. Now you have dangling bonds here, and these dangling bonds find each other immediately. Now if they connect, and this one connects, you fully recover same structure. So basically, it jumps one step. It jumps one step forward. It just shifted, but you did not create any new degree of disorder. That's why energy cost is lower than any other place. Because if you remove it from somewhere else, you increase disorder in material. You either have dangling bonds extra, or you have some strain configuration which did not exist before you removed carbon. But in this case, nothing like this. It's just translated. And actually, again, it makes perfect sense if you think about dislocation theory in crystals. This process is called climb. It's a bit unusual climb because your component doesn't need to diffuse through claustrophobic lattice, which is a very slow process in 3D crystals. But this is two-dimensional crystal. This component just goes into gas phase. That's why this climb is pseudo-climb, because it's not limited by slow diffusion, and that's why it takes place relatively easy, and that's the thing. And after that, you can simulate it. So what happens? This is like this thing runs forward like a steamroller. It's just smoke coming out of here, right? There is carbon emission here in the form of CO2. And as this smoke comes out, this dislocation glides this way. And that's what we see, that's what they see in experiment. Of course, they don't see the smoke because it's a single dimer atoms coming out, but they do see the consequences. And then we simulate, this is just for the fun, this is kind of Monte Carlo, but it's not really simulation, just to illustrate what's going on. Here we remove atom by atom, and you see this, the way it is shown, you don't see 5,7, but you know that this kink is a 5,7 dislocation, and it just keeps gliding back and forth, it's just shuttling back and forth, and of course carbon is going away and away, and nanotube becomes thinner and thinner as experiment shows. This is a fake part of it. It just actually it breaks earlier. But if you keep doing it, you get this carbon chain. So this was very interesting mechanism, very important mechanism to understand in relaxation of this type of material under high temperature and maybe electron beam. And from theory standpoint, to summarize, we learned a lot about these things. So basically, you learn that there is this key defect, which actually, it is important because it's kind of transferable. I will tell you later about similar thing in molybdenum disulfide and some other things, because we know that dislocations are, it's not material specific concept. You have to do modifications. So that's 5-7. So we learned the structure first. Second, we learned that there are two mechanisms of mobility. One is mass conserving. It's glide. By rotating the bond, you can move it left and right, but only in this plane. It is mass conserving process of glide. Another one is not mass conserving. You have to remove or add carbon, and if you remove carbon, it will move up. If you add carbon, if you insert carbon, which is also possible, then it will move down. So you basically have two these orthogonal degrees of freedom, one mobility along x-axis and another gives you mobility along y-axis. So depending on condition, it can actually move in any direction you want, but different speeds and different mechanisms. You can even write equations. I don't write them there, but you can write exact equations for driving forces. You have this defect. You have two major driving forces. One is due to applied strain. This would be glide in this direction. And it's exactly in this direction. It's not like just a cartoon. It's exactly in this direction. Another one, which is climb, which is force thermodynamic. This force is really from strain. This is purely mechanical force. This is Peach-Köhler force. There are equations for this Peach-Köhler force in theory of dislocations, and that's exactly what it is. This one is thermodynamic force. It's due to non-equilibrium, because you need sublimation, evaporation this way or that way. You can also calculate it. Some delta mu, proportional, and you get it. And this is tiny force, which we don't need to worry about. This is just due to curvature, because curvature of tube also has strain energy. So there is additional little force here due to change in diameter, because when you move this defect, you change diameter, so you change strain energy. So this gives you a complete description and kind of full control and understanding of how this thing can move around and what it does. Now, if I go to two-dimensional materials, this is just a transition slide. I didn't have time to do Minnesota for you. I actually don't know what shape of Minnesota is. But this, you probably don't know what shape of Texas is, but this is Texas. And this is very big two-dimensional material. Of course, it's also made from very big atoms. So Houston would be somewhere here, and the wall will be somewhere here. Anyway. So we now will talk about, this is intentionally hybrid, and now my colleague experimentalists, magically, they really produce this type of hybrids. In this case, it's just an illustration. This is some moly disulfide, this is graphene, this is boron nitrogen, and you can stitch them together with that level and this level perfection of the interface, which is, I will talk about it later. But basically, they do exist. This slide, actually, I don't discuss it, but it just emphasizes one important general feature. We call them in one article, we call it open canvas. Two-dimensional materials are different in a simple but fundamental way from 3D crystals, that they are fully open surface, right? Which means that exchange with environment, with atmosphere, is almost immediate in principle. As opposed to bulk crystal, if you change thermodynamic conditions around bulk crystal, atoms have to diffuse in and out. It's a very slow process. You have to anneal it for a long time. In this case, in principle, it's very fast. So thermodynamics can control of a gas phase, can control composition of defects here and composition of edges, type of edges, and even shape of crystal. So that's because it's so open, ideally from both sides, but if it's on substrate, at least on one side. Energy of doing it, of course, the barriers and energies are pretty high. Much lower in case of TMD. You see, just to show you scale. These are very rigid lattice. This one is polyelemental, but still very costly to move atoms around depending on which combination. But these are much softer, especially sulfur vacancies are known to be formed very easily, and that's what makes them a little bit volatile. Two elements, of course, also bring you new degree of freedom, figuratively speaking, but also literally, because if you look at Gibbs' relationship for degrees of freedom, it's number of components now minus number of phases plus 2. So if you increase number of components, then it means that you add degree of freedom. In this case, balance between elements can change composition easily. So this is a flexibility which we see in all defects and in lattices of 2D material. So we look at grain boundaries, we look at defects, and we try to learn what they are, and that's what I'm going to discuss. I'm not really watching time at all.
10 or 11 minutes.
Okay, so I will just, through basic things, I will go quickly. If you have perfect lattice of graphene, if you introduce just one pentagon, it's easy to see that it will create a cone. If you introduce one heptagon, it will create this, what we call Pringle, because it's like this cheap saddle point. And then, of course, if you join them together, then it brings you this familiar already 5,7, which is dislocation. So disclination strength of it is 0, but Burger's vector is not 0. Its energy is about 5 eV, but very hard defined. It's actually still unsolved kind of conceptual problem of what is energy of dislocation in two-dimensional case, because convergences are very slow. That's how strain stress looks like. You have tension here, compression here. If you compute it using elasticity theory, it gives you a very good idea that these bonds are under tension, these bonds are under compression. So you can know which one will first break. This explains that they reduce strength generally. You can go more, and you can understand that if you have many of them, actually strength can recover and become a little bit stronger, although you have more defects. But the mechanism behind it is extremely simple. They just cancel each other, because if you have stress distribution like this, plus minus on opposite sides, and then you have an array of them, then they cancel each other in the middle. You have partial compensation. That's why you have more defects, but material looks stronger. That's very simple. You don't need to do any sophisticated computations. Another important consequence is that in principle, at least freestanding membrane, becomes highly corrugated. You have these landscapes. You have these landscapes caused by these topological defects. So there is this interesting interconnection between topology of defects in the lattice and topography of what your system looks like. Now we look at reverse situation. Can you have topographically curved substrate and create, intentionally create some architectures and defects? But I will not talk about it. So these cracks, yeah, another maybe important and transferable point idea was the analysis of edge or maybe interfaces when you have low symmetry. It's very common for theorists calculating surfaces and same way edge energies by just considering a slab. So normally if you have graphene and you want to find edge energy, you just have a ribbon. You have a ribbon. If this was graphene, you have a ribbon, you calculate total energy, subtract energy of the perfect lattice, divide by 2, and you have edge energy. Problem is, if you go to boron nitrogen and all this class, they typically do not have inversion symmetry. Then you have a problem, because if you do the same recipe, you divide by 2, you get a number which doesn't make any physical, at least deep sense. Because on one side you have boron, on another side you have nitrogen. Clearly these edges are very different, and the average is just average. You cannot single out, at least this way, what is edge energy, and then you cannot do many things because of this. So then the way we solved this problem a few years ago, it was actually longer before I worked in North Carolina on lone symmetry. You should create a polyhedron, or in this case polygon of symmetry such that, if you can, not for all symmetries it's possible to do, such that all your edges are identical. So in this case, you have to go to, instead of ribbon, which is fails, right? This is not good approach. You cannot do it. Although some papers, there are papers when they just take average, but average doesn't make sense, of course. You have to create triangle either this way or inverted one. This is boron terminated. This is nitrogen terminated. It's more costly because then you have to compute. You have to consider energy of several triangles, how they scale. But if you do it, then from the slope, you can extract well-defined, precision depends on your computations, but at least it's strictly defined energy of this edge and strictly defined energy of this edge. So this was a good step because this allows you to move forward. And then you realize, oh, now actually there is no given energy of the edge because of this extra degree of freedom in Gibbs equation, right? F equals C minus P plus 2. You have chemical potential, which is undefined by material itself. You only have defined potential for Bn together, right? So the only well-defined quantity is this. Mu B plus mu N is constant because this is energy of formation of Bn. But individually, they can be different depending on gas phase or depending on some additional conditions which are not really in the picture. So the result is that all these energies of edges or interfaces in these hybrid structures, they are now functions. They are not fixed numbers. So that's what this plot shows. And I don't go through details. But you see, if it's a boron rich, and this is boron chemical potential, then it goes down. And this, if it's nitrogen rich in this case, then it goes up. And accordingly, if you want to know thermodynamic shape of a crystal, of course, you have to use Wolff construction. That's where edge energy goes in. You get different results. So for Bn even, it's quite fascinating. And now it's also done for different materials. Because now your thermodynamic condition, this chemical potential, through this picture which shows edge energy, it controls or it gives you different thermodynamic shapes, going all the way from this triangle, which is nitrogen terminated triangle, all the way to boron terminated triangle. And in the middle, you have a neutral point where you have hexagon, and you have even this, I think they're called nonagons. So you have this nonagons, this one and this one. But these are exact Wolff constructions depending on for different situations. So we were interested specifically in Bn inserted in graphene. And that's what you get, these quantum dots. I don't go about electronics, but this is, they can have different shapes depending on conditions at growth. And that's how chemical thermodynamics couples into shape of and the edge structure of these inclusions, and then, of course, into electronics. So this is a picture that illustrates it. So you have Bn, you can have these shapes, all is well defined, they're not random, depend on thermodynamic conditions here. Or you can have these shapes. And this what is in experiment, at least one example I show you, this is nitrogen terminated triangle, so this falls into this category, but there are also observations of truncated and different shapes, and now we understand why. So a few words about defects in these more complicated structures of TMDs. This was a challenge for a while. For a few years, people were asking me, oh, you're 5.7s, but there is no 5.7s in this. What do you do? And we became kind of compelled to figure it out because you have this triple Decker structure. It looks similar. So what you do? You just experimentalists tried to help me, but it was not very helpful. They gave me many pictures like this. They look like a terrible mess. And if you stare at it, you see, yes, there is grain boundary because there is a change in angle, but you barely can figure out anything. So then I gave up and we decided, okay, let's just design them following the rules. So you have to take a lattice, you remove half crystal line, half atomic line, and you relax it. You relax it using density functional theory if you want to do precise, or you can do now available tight binding, some kind of something. It's not so important, but density functional theory in this case, after relaxation, you find here structure like this. These animations just help you to see that they are three-dimensional objects. There are three according to Burger's vector. You can have this one, you can have inverted. You also can see how it couples with chemistry. This one is metal rich. We color it blue because you have more metal than a normal lattice here. This one is sulfur rich because you have too much sulfur. Just topology controls it. You cannot change it. It's just sulfur is right here. It must be. It must be. You have 1, 0, and Burger's vector accordingly is inversed. You have a larger one, but this one is energetically suppressed. It's too much strain. So this was nice. And then again, same story, because you can change the local chemistry, right? When Burger's vector is fixed, it's topological invariant. You still can locally, you can remove sulfur, remove 2 sulfurs, you can add metal and so on. So in fact, for one family, and these are reversible processes because they're local. You don't need to rebuild lattice. You cannot jump from here to here because Burger's vector is opposite. But within the family, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 possibilities. They have different chemistry, which means the energy of formation of this defect, again, is not one number. They are lines depending on chemical preference, chemical composition, and they depend on chemical potential. In this case, maybe sulfur, because gas phase sulfur usually is present. So you have these lines, and depending where you are, you can prefer this one or this one or that one. So that's very important because then it allows you to figure out what's going on in the zoo of defects. It may be different material, but the concept is still the same. You maybe need to repeat calculations if you want precise, if it's something tungsten diselenide, but it will be exactly the same slide, just with slightly different numbers. So that's the nice thing about it, that you learn it once and then you can do it for different things. After we figured out the structures, then you can, again, you know what you look for. You find them in experimental images, so this was beautifully, can be seen that all these defects can be found. And I don't discuss point defects because they're much simpler, but these are vacancies. You can identify them easier. They're not so tricky as dislocations. They're observed in experiments, and then using quantum chemistry or like solid state, you can find levels and optics and so on. I have infinite number of slides. That's why I can stop at any moment. It was not, unfortunately, particularly timed for this. This morning, I just assembled different things. So, grain boundaries in this case. I just show you without much of explanation. You can have grain boundaries, and the interesting thing that every time you get different band structure. Grain boundary is one-dimensional object, right? It's kind of translational invariant in one direction. It has a band, it has band structure. And interesting, just one to single out, is that some of them are metallic. That's quite exciting, we thought, because it means that embedded into semiconductor material, you can have one-dimensional metallic thread, right? This is one-dimensional nanowire, if you wish, built in, just because the grain boundary. So first we bumped into this in this work. We found just one, and we thought, oh, this is interesting. Then we did full classification. So actually, most of inversion grain boundaries are like this. When it's 180 degrees misoriented. If you take moly disulfide or any of them, 180 degrees misorient, this will be a grain boundary right here. For graphene, it's pure no grain boundary, because graphene is inversionally symmetric. But these guys have no inversion symmetry, so you have grain boundary. And most of them are metallic. So these structures are now observed in experiments, so it's quite interesting, this patterning. But for theory, I just tell you that, yes, analysis shows that they're pretty robust. You see this Fermi level, you see band crossing, so it's pretty robust metallic structures. They're not prone to Peierls instability or any tricks because they're fixed by surrounding lattice. Usually one-dimensional metal is a very finicky thing because it can undergo symmetry breaking and open the gap, but these cannot do it. They can be very mobile. Interesting that this chemistry has consequences even in mechanics. I will just show you this dislocation. At some conditions, it starts moving very fast, and was puzzled why. And then analysis shows that if you change this local composition, remember I showed you that there are several types. by adding sulfur or removing sulfur, you can reduce barrier. Normally, this is brittle material, which means that they should not move at all. They're sessile dislocations. But at some composition, your barrier is reduced to almost nothing. This is very low barrier. And if you have dislocation with this low barrier, it should glide kind of very easily. And so basically, theory predicts here, and they observed in experiments just one dislocation moving, that you can, by controlling chemistry, you can bring this brittle crystal into plastic state, even almost at room temperature, at very low temperature, not like carbon. This shows you the mechanism, but I don't have time to dwell on the mechanism, how it happens, why barrier is so low. Yeah, I will just show you this penguin. We have time for that. It just looks, my student says it looks like penguin to me. I say, okay, fine, put a penguin. I don't mind. It's this published penguin, by the way. It's in the paper. I don't know how, but it went through. We do a lot of work on growth. And problem with all class of TMDs, that there is almost nothing known about CVD mechanism. Actually, people don't do CVD. Mostly they do this kind of cooking, baking kind of mechanism because they don't have gas composition. Good CVD means that you know what is your gas precursor. In most of experiments synthesizing this stuff, they just start from solid oxide, heat it up, and something happens, and what is in the middle so far remains unknown. We work on it together with some experimental groups who are willing to do in situ analysis of gas phase, but not many can do it. If you don't know, then what do you do? Then you can do phenomenological theory. You say, I don't know what chemistry is going. I'll just model some kind of, I will have order parameter to represent my crystal and empty space, and I will have some additional to represent, if you do polycrystal, you need two order parameters, and then I use transport equations. Anyway, these are methods known as phase field modeling, and you can learn something. In this case, we learned and explained these puzzling structures of bow tie. It was a whole class of papers showing these bow ties and David stars, and why they are like this was very strange, because they definitely cannot be Wolf constructions, because they just have high perimeter. They cannot be kinetic. Wolf construction is. So the answer is that they are twins. They are twins. They have grain boundaries here. They must have inversion grain boundaries like this. And then if you realize that they are twins, then you can see, you can ask, so what is kinetics? How do they form? I will just show you the video because it's a school and it's more entertaining. This is a video, phase field simulation of how this thing, this is nucleus and this is second nucleus. So point is that when they collide, they tend to align to get good contact, and that's where you always get inversion grain boundary, not arbitrary angle, but 60 degrees or 180 degrees. And after that they grow, they become bow tie. This is simulation, this is same, but very slow, very fast. Very slow here, very fast here, just to show you results. You see here it's still emerging. You still don't have second seed. Now second seed just appeared. We start from circle. Of course, model takes care of it, forms triangles. We start from circle. It's not pre-made. And then it gives you this structure. This symmetry recovers beautifully. It doesn't matter how you position them. They can be pretty randomly positioned here. But because it grows out of the scale, then you don't see. At the end, it looks very symmetric, beautiful structure, like in many experiments. So last thing I thought I could mention, but maybe not. You can, again, is a kind of a defect, which is not really a defect. It's a p-n junction, but it is, you can say it is a defect because you have heterogeneity, right? If you have, let's say, graphene and something, I don't know even what this shows. This one shows, I don't know what. If you have heterojunction, we all know that they are very important. p-n junction is the key for kind of electronics and different things. And we all know how textbook, and people do make them. We all know how textbook describes them. If you read tons of books on p-n junctions, it's very simple. You can even think of two metals. Think of two metals with different work function. You bring them in contact. Electrons should go from high to low energy, right, to equilibrate it. And in 3D case, this is very easy, because in 3D case, electrons form double layer. It's like a capacitor, so it gives you opposite voltage, and after that your Fermi levels, oops, and equilibrated. Because you have double layer here. Very easy, very simple. But if you have 2D, then you have serious problem, because if same way your electrons go from high energy to low energy case, they cannot form double layer. In the best case, they can form plus and minus lines. They're just linear charges. And linear charges do not give you gap in potential, drop in potential between semi-spaces. They only give you a little bit of something here. And then the result is that charge seems like charge should be going and going and going. Instead of localized double layer, which is common in all books, and you can take Kittel or Ashcroft, even textbooks, and you will find this kind of discussion. But in 2D, it's a completely different story, because it's highly delocalized. You can find an analytical solution, it will be 1 over x. Instead of one sharp plane, you have 1 over x charge distribution. It's just an analytical result, very easy to obtain. But it has a lot of consequences, and we wanted to explore it for specific materials. So basically, you find that this is a broadly distributed depletion zone for these semiconductors, very different from 3D. That's why it was interesting for theory, because it really changes qualitatively, changes underlying theory. If you want to do for specific material, this is what you can do. You can do this kind of semi-classical maybe approach. You basically need to correctly reflect this Poisson equation, this situation with electrostatics. That's where story changes completely, because you don't have double layer. But specific material is all in just quantum capacitance of these layers. It's right here. So you can write charge here due to redistribution. There's this equation, and this is quantum capacitance of your material, graphene, disulfide, BN, whatever you want, which of course is simply density of states. So you can take this DOS from first principles calculations. You just take it. This is DOS of graphene. This is band structure, of course, but you can take DOS. This is band structure of moly disulfide. You can take this piece, and you have this is for the right side, this is for the left side. Then you use it in these equations, and then you only need to solve electrostatic problem. All first principles, material specific information is all hiding just right here, just input. And then you solve it, you find charge distribution, you find the Schottky barriers, and so on. You find all the properties. I probably, should I stop?
Probably.
I assume so. I don't know. You tell me.
I think that we're probably running a little bit
And
on the late side, yes.
so far, we kind of talked to experimental guys. There are some reports when they did measure using Kelvin probe. I'm not expert in this. That really there is a delocalized charge around this type of interfaces, but it's too early to say that there is any kind of confirmation. Of course, it's more complicated in reality, because if you put it in context of device, you have some kind of either gate here, some metal nearby, or something else. But in principle, that's the story. So let me make this one as the last slide. I have more, but I will make it the last slide, because it just looks good, and it was sent by some totally unknown person. He just sent it, and he claims that this is his bees. This is picture of his beehive with 5-7 defects all over. He colored them. He colored, but bees didn't color them. So the question is, do they make them or do they study them? This remains unknown. But they definitely work hard, as bees do. So I can only encourage students, I guess. I don't need to encourage faculty. They work hard already, too hard. I have to encourage students to work like bees and be happy about it. And thank you all very much for listening and being here.
Maybe what I can do is we can just allow questions, just informal questions during the break. Just
Yes, definitely. And I'm here.
Across the hall.
I'm here for 3 days, by the way, in case you.
Nice again. Jim Home? Yes, he's here. He was sitting there. Maybe he just stepped up to the restroom, but he's here. He's kind of in the back. Yeah. Morris, that's really cool stuff. I'm sorry to have to cut you off a little bit.
Oh, no problem. But I think I also started later, so it's not very strict.
Yeah, no,
I started like that.
No, I just want to make sure that we
Yeah, yeah.
not
No, this is
completely,
no, this is.